The sinking of the Titanic was probably the most famous shipwreck in history, one that continues to draw attention even more than 100 years later. When we think of what people experienced that night, shivers run through our bodies. The fascinating stories of the passengers on that ill-fated liner could make volumes. Today, the tragedy of the Titanic seems as terrifying, shocking and mysterious as the night it sank. Even though it seems as if we already know everything about that terrible night, we continue to make discoveries that shake us to our core. Few people know about the valiant second radio operator of the Titanic, who helped his senior colleague to the last and did not leave the side of the sinking steamer. But he still managed to wrest his life from the clutches of the ice monster called the North Atlantic. These days, the position of radio operator does not exist on merchant ships, abolished. It was replaced by the second mate of the captain, navigator. But at the beginning of the 20th century their role was very important. Vital. Next I will tell you the real story about him, the mystery of the Titanic, and how he was saved. Be sure to see the video to the end. Beginning. Harold S. Bride was born in England on 11.01.1890 and was the youngest child of 5. After graduating from high school, the young man decided to tie his life to wireless communication and entered the field. In 1911 he completed his studies and took a job as a radio operator for the Marconi Maritime Telegraph Company. He started ashore and later went to sea as a radio operator for the same company. Harold took great pride in climbing aboard the largest and most majestic, at the time, ship, the Titanic, 269 meters long. He was only 22 years old. A little later, the chief radio operator, John Jack Phillips, who was 3 years older, climbed aboard the huge iron ship. Despite their young age, the guys were top-notch professionals. In those days, there was fierce competition and companies did not allow their radio operators to communicate with their colleagues from other companies, except in emergency situations. What's more, the help signals were different and probably played a key role in saving lives. But about that a little later. 10.04.19123. At 12 o'clock the Titanic unmoored and left Southampton, England. After picking up some passengers in the ports of France and Ireland, Cherbourg and Queenstown, the enormous steamship's route took her through the North Atlantic to New York. Colleagues had agreed to take shifts in the radio room at 6 o'clock every 6 hours, but could substitute for each other if necessary. Very familiar. These days, 6x6 is the classic cargo watch in port for second and third mate captains. No personal life. Harold Bride was on his radio watches receiving reports of weather conditions, navigational and ice conditions, and a great deal of time was spent on personal correspondence. Enthusiastic passengers sent hundreds of messages to their families, and responses came in just as many. The denouement. April 13, 1912. Despite the fact that the ship was equipped with the most powerful, at the time, transceiver, the equipment failed due to overload from personal messages. The young radio operators spent about 6 hours repairing the equipment, which was nevertheless successful. The human factor had its place here too. The radio operators were knocked out of mode and exhausted. This was very reckless on the part of the radio operators, the mates and the captain. No correspondence, much less personal correspondence, should interfere with navigational safety. In this mess, Bride and John were missing some important messages about ice conditions and the position of large icebergs not far from the steamer's passing route. April 14, 1912. After standing the evening watch from 2 o'clock to 8 p.m., a tired Harold went to bed before the next. 22:30, local time. The Titanic diverged from one of the ships on the opposite course, from which a message of navigational danger in view of the large amount of ice was transmitted. As it turned out later, this ship damaged her stern on an iceberg, but she made it to her destination port. The Titanic's bridge ignored this message because no additional forward lookouts were even posted. 23:39. 2 forward lookouts saw the outline of a large iceberg right on the bow at about 550 to 750 meters, about 3.5 cables. The speed of the huge Titanic was about 22 knots, almost 41 kilometers per hour, which was disastrous for ice navigation, and of course there was almost no time to maneuver. As a shipmaster, it was quite unclear to me why I had to go at full speed and develop such a frantic speed when dozens of messages on the ice danger. The Zoe was on watch and gave the order to the helmsman, hard to starboard. That meant, at the time, to turn the rudder to the left as far as it would go. Couldn't find any confirmation of this information. It's rather illogical. If you know why it was the other way around in the early 20th century, post in the comments. Every second counted. Almost immediately the telegraph was switched to stop. After about half a minute the rudder position was moved to the opposite side to steer the stern away. 23:40. There was a tangential collision with an iceberg. The most interesting thing is that the steel plates of the hull of the steamer withstood the impact, but the rivets fixing them did not. About 3 meters above the keel, starting from the bow, there were cracks that stretched about 90 meters to the stern. We can argue about it for a long time, but the Zo should not have touched the telegraph and reduced the steering ability of the ship. Maybe then it would have been possible to get the bow and stern to a safe distance, but that is only a guess. 3.5 cables at 22 knots is too short to maneuver such a large ship. The surviving sailor told the whole truth. And here is what happened next, according to the second radio operator. He told this in an interview with a famous American newspaper. When I woke up, I went up to the deckhouse and heard John's radio exchange by private correspondence. We were both tired, so I decided to take his shift early. All was quiet and calm. But after a few minutes, the captain turned to us with the words, "We have collided with an iceberg. I will quickly assess the severity of the damage, and you stand by and wait for my order. We will probably have to give a distress signal." Just 10 minutes later, there was serious panic on the flybridge. The captain was talking agitatedly to the assistants. Then he came into our cabin with orders to send the distress, help, signal. John only asked what signal to use and got down to business. In brief, in 1912, there were 2 distress signals, SQD and the new for that time, but familiar to ours, SOS. The first was invented in 1904 by the Marconi Company and was transmitted only on ships with their equipment. In 1906, SOS was invented, which was the fastest and most non-stop radio transmissions. It was very convenient and was adopted by many countries. And what signal do you think they started to give on the Titanic? Well, of course, the one that was prescribed by the rules on board, SQD. Ships were responding to it, but they were too far away. Some ships that were within 100 miles of the Titanic couldn't hear their signal because they only used SOS. A little later, Bride decided to make a joke, which caused the captain and a fellow radio operator to laugh. "John, send the SOS, since you haven't used it yet. This may be your one and only chance to try it." After laughing, the radio operator sent the first SOS signal from the Titanic. The guys then sent signals for help for about an hour and a half, without stopping and without knowing what was happening on the ship, and most importantly on the dinghy deck. April 15, 1912. 01 hour 50 minutes. The evacuation of women, children and the elderly was in full swing. There were not enough boats for everyone. A real battle was beginning. The men had to be driven out of the lifeboats with firearms to save the women and children. The steamer's experienced captain came into our cabin with the words, "Guys, you have valiantly fulfilled your duty. Get off the ship before it's too late." But John wasn't going anywhere. He kept up the emergency exchange. I quickly gathered my things and John's, got him out of the wheelhouse, and we ran out on deck. There was such panic that few knew what was going on or where to go. John went aft for some reason and I never saw him again. On the dinghy deck, a group of men were trying to throw the dinghy off. I began to help them. But the wave tossed it over, and I got caught in it. I was thrown overboard with the boat. The boat was upside down, and I was short of air underneath. I don't remember how I managed to get out from under it, but someone helped me to do it. The real fight for life began. My legs were being squeezed, but I had no strength to say anything. No one helped the swimmers. They pushed me away with oars and improvised objects. April 15, 1912, about 4 o'clock to 5 a.m. About 1,500 people could not be rescued. Harold lived a quiet life in Scotland, was a real family man with 3 children. He passed away at the age of 66. Harold S. Bright is carried off the Carpathia in his arms, his legs were badly injured. So what is the mystery of the Titanic, and who is to blame? Many consider Captain Smith to be the culprit, as he most likely contributed to the excessive speed in a difficult navigational situation. But the watchmate, especially the Zo, should also have his own navigational head on his shoulders. Others, on the contrary, consider him a hero who went to the bottom together with the ironclad. However, there is another very interesting and significant person in this whole story. Titanic belonged to the largest company in England, Whittister Line. So, its founder, Thomas H. Ismay, was on board. Moreover, he managed to survive and escape in one of the lifeboats. Apparently, he was the one who decided how fast the boat should go. And the 62-year-old captain just wanted to retire nicely. If you were interested, thank the author by putting a like. And also do not forget to subscribe so as not to miss the outputs of even more interesting videos of my channel. Turn on notifications by clicking on the bell and share this video with your friends. What else interesting can you add to this video? Write in the comments, it will be interesting to read.